Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Callie Knabley. I am the project manager for ICBA, Independent Banker Magazine, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today's webinar event, sponsored by Quorum. Leading the presentation today is Kevin Lau. He is the online marketing manager at Quorum, overseeing all of the company's social media, customer advocacy, and digital marketing projects. Previously, Kevin has worked at organizations including Google, AOL, and Adobe. In addition, Kevin has a digital marketing consulting firm helping entrepreneurs and small businesses create awareness, generate leads, and revenue for their organizations. And now, with our housekeeping items and all of our introductions complete, Kevin, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Well, thanks, Callie, for the introduction. And I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. As we mentioned, today we're actually covering a subject called When Minutes Matter, Keeping Your Bank Up When IT is Down. So let's get straight to the information. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to just chat them over, and then we'll do our best to answer those in a timely fashion. So what we're actually going to be covering in this session is a couple things. The first one is how business reliance on IT has been accelerating. Second thing is physical disasters, the least of your worries. Compliance can't be avoided in times of disaster. Economic trade-offs and solutions. Cloud and virtualization have dramatically improved your options. And there's never been a better time for a bad day. So, as you can see from the slide, everyone, all organizations, individuals, we all rely on data. These are just some stats you could see, but it's kind of staggering when you think about it, but there's over 7 billion communicating devices out there, and 5 billion of them are not actually computers. So it means that a lot of people now are using smartphones, tablets, mobile devices, and they're transferring a lot of this data, and sometimes it's not necessarily secure or safe. And so just in the past, if you look at the stat here, between the birth of the world in 2003, there were 5 exabytes of information created. Now we create 5 exabytes every 2 days. So there's really no shortage of data out there. And the challenge now with organizations is being able to protect that data, make sure it's safeguarded from different types of threats, cyber attacks, and things like that. And I think organizations in general are just being more aware of how the data is being safeguarded. So what we're going to be covering, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is really, when we talk about business IT and disaster recovery, typically what you see in the news is you see a lot of things related to natural disasters, which grab headlines. But the problem is that they don't really talk about the mundane problems that face a lot of organizations and businesses. So things related to, for example, facilities, hardware failure, software, user errors is definitely a huge one. And so they really just talk about the natural disasters like earthquakes, fires, things like that. But the things that really make the big difference are, these individual issues that happen to the actual hardware and software and things like that. So there's a big gap between what ought to work and what's known to work. And one of the problems is, especially for organizations, is a lot of times when they have some type of backup or recovery or some type of solution out there that they think is going to help them safeguard their data, the problem with that is that oftentimes they actually don't test or really ensure that their information is actually working, or their tools or resources that they have on board. And so they kind of just hope and they think that it's going to work, but at the end of the day, they still don't really have the manpower, because typically you're maybe a 1 or 2 man IT person in an organization, and so you just don't have the time or the bandwidth to always be testing and do those things to ensure that your data is being protected and safeguarded. And the one thing that we try to emphasize is really it's not just about the backup, because there's a lot of companies that could do that, but it's really about how fast you can get up and running when a critical issue is taking place or anything happens. So with that being said, there's an interesting stat. So Radware's, they actually did an annual security report, and they actually indicate that cyber attacks will continue to be a serious issue in 2014. You've probably seen them in the headlines. Target being a big one recently. Other chains like P.F. Chang's, for example. A lot of these organizations, there's widespread cyber attacks, which are not just affecting, the business operations, but it's really about the reputation management. It's, when you have any type of downtime, whether it's a couple hours, couple days, obviously it affects your reputation with your customers, with any of your partners that you have, and things like that. So it's overall just the brand perception. And the interesting thing to keep in mind with this is that in 2013, 160 large data breaches were reported to the Office of Civil Rights. And taken together, these breaches involved the unsecured protection health information, or you basically call it PHI, of nearly 6.85 million individuals. So that's a pretty large number of people, and these could be related to things like identity theft. I would imagine that's definitely a big thing for, especially in the banking community, making sure that data is safe and personal information is protected. But when you think about that, that's $7.2 million of data breaches that just happened back in 2012. So obviously that number is probably much larger in 2014. But if you break it down, that's $214 per breach record, which is a pretty large amount of data that's being breached. So when we talk about disaster, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there's mainly 4 types of disasters that really occur. And I'll kind of start from the left to the right, but hardware failure, it actually accounts for 55%, so pretty much the majority of the types of disasters that happen to businesses and organizations. And hardware failure could be simply, power supply going out or server going down, anything related that you basically have to, boot up, you need to rack and stack, anything that you need to get back up and running. Natural disasters, like I said, surprisingly, it only makes up 5% of the type of disasters that actually occur that actually affect a business organization. And again, those things could be like fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, things of that nature. And then human error, which is also very high. Sometimes it could just be a simple situation where, someone trips over a wire and then, something falls or something breaks. Or even more common is just someone ends up spilling something on one of the servers and it causes a power outage or some type of fluctuation. So those little things, especially when you're dealing with such sensitive hardware and infrastructure, they could definitely be affected by human error. And then, of course, software failure. So software failure could be everything from, you're trying to upload the latest patch or an upgrade, and for whatever reason, it just gets botched and it doesn't work like it's supposed to. I'm sure we've all had situations like that actually happen in the past. So the other thing is we want to talk about downtime tolerance, and especially when you work directly with customers on a regular basis, typically what you're going to find is that the closer you are with interacting with customers, on like a transactional basis or an individual basis, the downtime tolerance is definitely going to, or the amount of downtime that you can actually tolerate in your organization is probably going to be a lot less. So to give you some statistics, we actually, Aberdeen did a report back in 2012 that downtime costs a mid-sized company approximately $74,000 an hour, and only 28% of SMBs actually test their backup plan. So what that means is that a lot of organizations don't even know if the equipment that they bought or the DR solution that they have in place is actually going to work in the situation that they expect it to work. So as I mentioned, a lot of these people, especially if you only have 1 or 2 people in your department, sometimes you just don't have the time, and that's totally understandable. But the thing is, it would make sense to have something that's a little bit more automated to help you, especially if if you're looking for a solution that's going to help make sure that your data is safeguarded. And then 56% of companies with fewer than 25 servers said that they could withstand only an hour or less of downtime before losing revenue or suffering other significant adversities. So as I mentioned, it's not just the revenue loss, but it's also the amount of your reputation in the marketplace and things like that that ultimately affect your overall brand perception in the community. So those are some things that downtime tolerance affects. Now, there's other things besides just downtime in an organization, and it's really, when we talk about downtime, we really emphasize on recovery, meaning being able to get you up and running as quickly as possible. But there, depending on what type of solution you have, there are hidden backup costs that surface at the time of recovery. So downtime events happen to everyone, and the thing is that, as I mentioned, it could be natural disasters, human errors, things of that nature. But really, it's if your recovery times are larger than expected, meaning if the average person, I would say the top executive says that 10 hours on average is the amount of time needed to recover. IT managers say up to 30 hours because there's a lot of things involved on the back end. It's not just being able to get the equipment powered up and running. It's the labor costs involved. It's testing the equipment again. In some situations, maybe if you have a backup solution that is sent to like a disk or tape solution, and you're trying to back it up from that, maybe the disk drives are bad or it doesn't work. And so you have to factor in all the time that's needed to make sure that when you're bringing up your servers or bringing up your equipment, that's going to work flawlessly like it should. And so those are some of the hidden costs that you're looking at. It's not just the hours that are going by, but the labor, the hardware costs if you have to purchase new equipment, the transportation, the lost data, and really just being able to restore everything as if it was just like it was before the actual disaster happened. And so that's why you can actually consider, the cost of downtime is large. It could be $74,000 or more depending on the type of industry or the organization. So right now I want to give you a quick case study of how this has actually played out in one organization, and this is in New Orleans. And so back in October 25th of 2010, so this was actually 5 years after Hurricane Katrina, the parish of Orleans, which is a civil district court, they basically have mortgages and conveyance database. And what happened was all the data that they had, and literally it was thousands of files, hundreds of thousands of files, actually crashed. So the CTO at the time, Tanya Laundrie, she actually suggested ahead of time that they needed some type of backup solution that's going to make it more automated, something that would actually help them out in case something like this were actually to happen. But a lot of times it's, when some type of issue happens like this, people wait until it actually happens before they do something about it, which is kind of sad in this situation. But, the district court, the clerk actually decided against it. And what happened was, as I mentioned, they lost thousands of mortgage records filing 2 floors. And the problem was that their cloud backup service stopped receiving good updates back in July. And so they lost all that data. They didn't have any testing in place to really ensure that what they were actually doing was working. And so 179,000 paper records had to be re-entered manually. So when we talk about not just the time of getting all the servers back up and running, it's really about the labor costs and all those other things that are the hidden costs associated with being able to recover and getting back up and running. And so, unfortunately, the county clerk, Dale Atkins, she's still employed at the parish, but the CTO was let go, even for recommending the solution that would help her out. And so they kind of just swept it under the rug. So another thing that we took a recent poll, and downtime tolerance decreases as IT moves closer to customers. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when you think about these stats right here, a lot of organizations, especially depending on what type of services they're marketing, especially in the banking community, when you're working with a lot of folks that on a one-on-one basis that come into your organizations or to your banks, obviously the amount of downtime that you can tolerate is going to be less. And so when I talk about this, less than 1 hour of downtime is actually acceptable. So 39% of attendees actually said that they can only accept less than an hour of downtime. And then 1 to 3 hours at 21%. And when you look at that data, it's surprising because for a couple of reasons. Well, the first one is when we have these sort of really high expectations as far as how much downtime we can tolerate, and then we look at the actual type of equipment or resources available or the type of solutions that you have in place to actually meet those requirements, it doesn't really match up. And so at the end of the day, you're really setting yourself up for failure if you don't have the proper solutions in place and you don't have the proper protection to make it sure that it's going to be easy for you to recover when an incident actually happens. And like I said, it's not just the natural disasters that happen, but it could be a number of things from hardware failures to software failures and things like that. So now I want to take just a quick couple seconds, actually a minute or so, to do a quick poll. And so if everyone could just enter their information. The first question is, how many critical servers do you manage in your organization? And the second question is, what is the longest amount of downtime you could afford to have in your organization? So I'll give everyone a couple seconds to just fill out that question really quick. And again, the options for the first question is 1 to 24 critical servers, 25 to 49, 50 to 74, or 75 plus servers. And then for the second question, how much downtime can you actually afford? A few minutes, a few hours, a few days, a few weeks. And then once we have the information, I can go ahead and read basically what everyone has entered into and recorded. Okay, so it looks like most of the people have 1 to 24 servers, critical servers that you're protecting. So that would be things like your Exchange, your SQL, things like that. And so it looks like most people that could actually afford downtime, well, the majority of them actually said that they could take a few hours of downtime. So we'll actually go through that a little bit more to see kind of what that actually looks like when you're actually booting something up and all the steps involved, but that's actually good information to share. So now we're actually going to talk about some of the existing options that maybe you've heard of, or different types of solutions out there in terms of being able to back up and recover your critical data and applications. So the first one would be traditional backup. Now, these would be things like a disk or a tape. And again, these are things that typically are relatively inexpensive when you think about backup and being able to recover. But the problem with that is it has a lengthy restore process. It could typically take hours, sometimes days or weeks. And it's really infrequent, and for a lot of times people don't really test it just because it is inconvenient to do so. And the other problem is that you have to typically send it off-site. And again, a lot of people don't, since they don't test, most of the time, 50% of the time actually, doing a full recovery actually often results in a full failure. They're not able to test it, so they don't really know if it's going to be working or not. So the second other type of solution out there is a replicated data center. Now, for some folks, it's definitely great in terms of being able to hit your recovery time objectives, meaning being able to be up and running as quickly as possible. But again, because of that, there's a lot more cost, and it's typically double the cost of other types of solutions out there, because you're more or less building something completely from scratch, or building something that's very custom. And at the same time, you're not just dealing with one solution. Again, you're dealing with typically 7 to 8 different products or vendors. You're consulting multiple different run books. And so there's a lot of complexity involved with that. And so especially when you're just 1 or 2 people, it becomes a little bit cumbersome to do any type of testing whatsoever in that process. Now, cloud backup storage, that's another huge thing that you probably heard a lot about cloud recently. But again, it's going to have a longer restore because it's basically limited to the pipe that you have available. So if you're moving huge chunks of data, whether it's terabytes or larger files, it's going to take you a long time to download that data. So if you're moving from a server directly to a cloud, if you have 3 terabytes as an example, it could take you 6 months at 1.5 megabytes per second. And again, then you're in a similar situation where you then take the data that's in the cloud and then archive it to some type of disk or tape medium, and then you have to wait for the mail to actually ship it to you physically, so that you could then boot it up and rack it and stack it to your servers. So those are some issues with traditional backup solutions. Now, when we talk about recovery economics and literally how fast you can be up and running, if you look at this graph here, traditional backup, like I mentioned, it's going to fit somewhere on the far right, because while it's relatively inexpensive to implement and to use in an organization, it's also going to have a longer restore time, and it's going to take you much longer to just be able to get your critical data back up and running. Now, on the flip side of that, you have the replicated data center, which again, I mentioned is going to be a little more costly, but it is going to give you that sub-seconds in terms of being able to be up and running as fast as possible. Now, where Quorum actually fits in the mix of this is we took the best of the replicated data center, or what we really call it is a replicated data center in a box, because essentially we're able to hit, we really emphasize being able to recover as quickly as possible, almost eliminating downtime as much as possible. So literally down to a couple minutes in most cases. And so being able to have instant recovery is something that a lot of organizations, especially that deal with auditors or deal with any type of sensitive data, especially like healthcare, banking, financial services, etc., they need to have their data up and running fast. And so we're able to do that literally with just one click and be able to do it quickly. And so another reason why traditional backup is obsolete, you know, back in the day, when we talk about DR, it really was talking about, you know, the hours and days that you had to purchase all this data, all this information, all this equipment, and then being able to restore it. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So it's not just the cost associated with getting that equipment, but then ultimately just the labor costs and everything else associated with it, getting it back in place and functioning properly. And so maybe you've also heard of new technologies that are revolutionizing the recovery space. And so I mentioned a little bit about cloud, but the nice thing about cloud is that it delivers, it's basically delivering computing and storage capacity as a service. So it allows for you to send those incremental changes to be sent over the internet connection, and avoiding you have to pick up, you know, daily tapes or disks or nightly backups that you would do. And then on the flip side, you also have virtualization. So being able to create a virtual machine or a virtual recovery node that acts like a real computer and operating system is really, it's really one of those powerful things. And being able to rapidly create and replace those systems, especially if they were to go down in any type of situation, that's one of the great things about virtualization. So now let me give you an example of exactly how Quorum would fit in a typical IT organization based on the situation here. So if you look at this slide example, typically, you know, what you're going to have is you're going to have an on-site appliance, and you're also going to have one that's an off-site to the cloud. And the reason why we would have both is because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, rather than just having one or the other, we want them to be able to sync continuously so that all the data is constantly being shared and being sent. So all the records are being up to date. You're never missing a beat whatsoever. And then you also don't have to worry about sending, relying on some type of disk or tape medium and then shipping it back to you, like, would take a longer time and restore process. So typically what we find is that the critical data and applications that you want to protect in your servers, things like the SQL, the Exchange, the Linux, etc., all those critical servers that you want to protect, you could put on an on-site appliance. And the way that we actually establish a connection is what we do is we create a connection through an agent, and you can also do an agentless depending on what type of restrictions your servers have. And that establishes a connection between the servers and the on-queue appliance. And what that does is then we're able to create two different repositories, one that has basically the full backup, and then one that also stores a virtual copy. So in the case that anything would happen, the virtual copy can boot up immediately. And so the first day we actually take a full recovery or full backup, and then after that would be incremental forever at that point, sending the latest updates or changes to the cloud. So let's say, for example, in this situation, a typical thing that would happen was, let's say you have a power supply failure, and so one of the servers actually goes down. So if you're the only one or two person IT person in the organization, you're probably going to have several end users or a couple hundred, depending how big your organization is, calling you, asking you why my email's down, why I can't access a certain, certain application, things like that. And so besides just dealing with the end users, you're also dealing with how quickly can you get your server back up and running. And for a power supply failure on a good day, I would say maybe 4 hours to be able to have, power supply sent from Dell and then being able to install it, get your servers back up and running. Or, on a bad day, it could take you realistically probably 8 hours or more, maybe even a couple days, depending how long it takes to ship the equipment out to you. But in that type of situation, what we do is we simply boot up a virtual server, like I mentioned, and because all the data has already been backed up, and because the OnQ appliance or the actual appliance that you have on site mimics the IP address of the affected server, you simply just access our OnQ dashboard, which I'll show you in a couple slides. And after that, you're able to just boot up like normal, and your end users, all they have to do is refresh their screen, and they're up and running. With just one click, you're able to get everything up and running. You're able to see literally what servers are being affected and just continue business like normal. And that's one of the most powerful things about our solution is that you're able to do it in such an easy-to-use fashion and also be able to do it in literally a couple minutes at most that, you know, you don't really have to sweat whatsoever. You can just tell your end users that they can continue working like normal, and then you just fix the problem while they continue working in their business. So in the case that you actually have a full on-site failure, meaning let's say you do have a natural disaster that happens and everyone has to evacuate the building, if the on-site appliance actually gets destroyed or something happens, you still have that off-site location. And for end users, if they're at home or they need to access their email and things like that, well, what they could do is they could just access it through a VPN that we've established ahead of time. All they do is VPN. They're able to access their critical apps, their emails, any type of programs that are must for the organization, and they just refresh their screen and they're good to go. And the nice thing with this too is that any changes or updates that are made would be incremental, so any new changes would be sent to the cloud, and they continue just working as if nothing actually happened. And that's kind of the nice thing, again, with the solution that we have in place. Now, here's actually what our OnQ dashboard actually looks like. When you look at this, it's very simple, very easy to use, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of our customers love it, is because they're simply able to see which of the servers are being protected, which ones are being affected. If one of them are showing red, then all you have to do is literally click a button and then be able to boot up a virtual server, and the virtual server would be up and running. You're also able to see and schedule your backups daily, weekly, depending on how often you want to do them, and you're able to see everything in one dashboard. Very simple, easy to use. The other thing that's nice is we have a test network, which a lot of our customers actually use as basically their lab environment. So if they're trying to test the latest patch upgrade or any latest changes before they actually deploy it to the production network, they're able to do that within the test network, and then once it's working, they move it over to the production network, so they don't have to worry about those software issues or software botches that actually could happen. So again, this is one of the nice things about how easy it is to use in our dashboard. So again, now to kind of just talk about some of the predictions, and some of this you're already aware of, but Jean-Luc Chatelain, actually from Information CTO, he actually predicted in 2014 the number 3 biggest prediction. It said software defines basically everything. Basically what he's saying is that hardware is not going away anytime next year or anytime in the near future for that matter. So the thing is that a lot of organizations, when it comes to the hardware that they have available and the type of software or solutions, a lot of times organizations are using old, outdated hardware or processes in place just because maybe they're not aware of it, or maybe they just simply didn't have the time to execute or implement a new project that they were working on to make it easier for them. But the problem with this is that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in a couple of slides, is that a lot of the hardware that we have nowadays is not really fitting the needs of what our organizational goals are. So what I'm really referring to is if you're trying to be able to recover very fast or quickly, is the equipment that you're using right now going to be able to help you, especially in those critical situations that you need the data up and running as quickly as possible? You can't afford any downtime whatsoever, and you need something that works when you need it to work. And so that's really what we're saying here. So again, just as a recap, the 2 choices that we actually provide are an appliance-based and also what's called a disaster recovery as a service, or DRaaS type of solution, which is more or less a hybrid cloud solution. The nice thing, again, one of the things that really emphasize is ease and affordable protection for small to medium-sized businesses. So if one of the things are rapid deployment, recovering in moments, restoration at your convenience, testing every day, a single solution for high availability DR and backup, if those are some of the things that you're interested in, obviously our solution can definitely meet those needs. And the other thing is simple user interface that streamlines basically all the sophisticated technology that you have. So whether it's virtualization, hybrid cloud services, source deduplication, distributed computing, resource management, automation, these are all things that our solutions definitely exceed at. And one of the reasons why our customers just love it because it's so easy to use that even if you're not really a technical person, you could still learn how easy it is to implement this. So again, just to kind of recap, all the different things that really what you want to look for in a backup and recovery solution is, on the storage side, backing up your repositories, that critical data, deduping, sending all those incremental files over time rather than having to send huge chunks of files, network access, how secure is it, vSwitches, ease of use. Again, that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people love about it, is just that automation, being able to monitor all the critical data, seeing it from beginning to end, and then virtualization. So if you're actually moving from a physical to a virtual or virtual to virtual environment, those are things that we could definitely help you out with. And so, so disaster recovery with hybrid cloud, when minutes matter most. Again, business IT systems, more important than ever, even small to medium-sized businesses, really, again, like I mentioned, it's about being able to recover in minutes, not hours or days, especially if you need to be able to have your critical data at a moment's notice being able to spin up quickly. And really just being able to prepare for not just the natural disasters, but really those mundane problems that happen, the hardware failures, the software, the human errors that we talked about. And the new technology makes one-click recovery really possible. So being able to have that hybrid cloud services, that virtualization, source deduplication, that automation that I mentioned. And then again, dependable, easy, and affordable. We actually just launched recently a new product called OnQ Prime, which makes it very affordable for organizations to be able to protect those critical data and those servers that they have. So really, we emphasize, again, it's just the recovery in moments, restoration at your convenience, and daily automated testing that's really simple to use, easy to access, and being able to implement across the organization. So really, my recommendations in all this is to, when you're doing your investigation, if you're looking for any type of backup or recovery solution, is really emphasize automation is the key. How easy is it to test your critical data? How easy is it going to be able to push a button and be able to boot up your critical data fast and in timely fashion? And then really just being able to select vendors with a long-term vision that focus on the recovery side, because there's a lot of solutions out there that focus solely on backup. And again, they may not necessarily meet all the needs that you have in place for your business. And then ultimately implement tiered recovery, build multi-layer SLAs for BU and recovery, and then perform regular testing, as I mentioned. Those are some of the big things. And now we'll just go into questions. But before we actually do that, I just want to mention really briefly, if anyone online actually has any additional questions about our different types of solutions, whether it's our hybrid cloud or appliance-based solution, we can actually get a lot of great insights is if you actually check out Spiceworks, which is a IT professional community similar to kind of like Facebook, but in the sense that it's all to IT professionals. It has about 5 million IT pros in there, and we've been very active in the community. We have about 100 plus 5-star reviews there. So if you want to actually see what some of our customers are saying about our solution, it's a great place to network and also see what other people are saying. So I'll just leave that at there. So now we can go into any questions. So it looks like we have a couple that came up, but if anyone does have any questions, feel free to just chime in and just ask them in the chat right to your right-hand side. But the first question that we have is, if I have several terabytes of data, how do I get it? How do I get it in the cloud? So if you have several terabytes of data and you're trying to move it to the cloud, basically It's really going to be dependent on the data size, completion. It's dependent on the type of cable you have, whether it's a T1 and so on. So really remember, we do a full backup at the beginning only, and then after that, it's incremental changes forever sent over the wire. So that's basically how we work in the cloud. The second question is the recovery node fully equal to my production workflow? For that, the answer is yes. There are some minor registry differences to account for the new virtual hardware, but your data is basically the same. And we got another question that's asked, what is Quorum's experience in recovering core processing functions? So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a long history of bringing up your key systems. We actually, especially your critical data, when we're talking about, Exchange, SQL, and file services, that's something that we definitely specialize in, being able to recover those critical applications that you're using, no matter what type of organization you have. We're able to do that very fast, very quickly. We actually even do a monthly hangout that we do, actually showcasing step-by-step how that actually looks like. So if you want to see a live demo, if you reach out to me directly, I can get you in touch with one of our senior engineers to actually show you how to do that. So we had another question that came from, looks like, so someone is asking, data that is written to the virtual server after a disaster will be transferred to the physical server after the recovery process. So to answer that question, basically the way it works is, if you're booting up a virtual server after any type of disaster, we could do bare metal restores, any type of restoration that you need. But basically, if you have a disaster and your server is affected, you move it to a virtual server, you're able to then, any of the latest changes that happen, everything is being maintained, all the updates or changes are being taken care of, and then you could easily fail back to your original server once you have that fixed or the problem is taken care of. And it doesn't matter if it's fail back to virtual or physical. And the nice thing with that is we actually had a customer back in I think it was 2013, when Superstorm Sandy hit the East Coast. And what happened was they had two different sites that they were dealing with, and they were actually anticipating the storm actually taking place and happening and affecting their business operations. And so they wanted to prepare ahead of time to make sure all that data was not, they weren't going to experience any type of downtime whatsoever. And so they had two different sites, and they made sure that all the infrastructure was in place. So, if they needed to fail over to a virtual server, they were able to do so. And in this case, they were able to spin up within a couple minutes. And the nice thing was they were able to stay within the virtual production server for over 90 days while they were fixing the issue. Because again, the East Coast, they had, I think it was at least a week, possibly even 2 weeks, where they didn't even have power. And so all that downtime, they just, they were fixing not only just their brick and mortar business, but getting the right equipment in place and then being able to boot up everything and all the labor and time involved. So in that situation, they're able to do it within 90 minutes, or 90 days, sorry. So I think that's all the questions we have. So I guess I'll give it back to Callie.
All right, sounds great. Thanks so much, Kevin, for that wonderful presentation. And thanks to all of our attendees who joined us today. If we were unable to get to any of your questions, we will reach out to you within the next day or two with the answer via email. So if you have questions, you can continue to write it in the Q&A panel. Also, in the next 2 business days, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's event for your review, or you can forward it along to your colleagues who are unable to attend today's event. So this concludes our webinar for today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.